So I never would have dreamed the man about to become my son-in-law would look me right in the eye and say the best thing I could do for his life was just disappear. But that's exactly what happened the night before my daughter's big day. Oh, and before I go on, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Drop it in the comments, won't you? And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and honestly, it really does help us keep making more of these stories for you. All right, now where were we? I'd spent 30 good years building a life of integrity, working double shifts as a nurse, then running a medical billing company so my Sarah would want for nothing. But there I was, in the fancy library at the country club, being told I was nothing but a stain on the perfect future this Brad fella had planned for my daughter. Brad, with his bright smile and ice-cold heart, leaned against the desk and told me the only wedding gift he really wanted was for me to disappear from their lives forever. Said Sarah agreed, that my working-class background was just a painful reminder she was desperate to leave behind, and that if I loved her at all, I'd hand over the deed to the lake house and vanish into a lonely retirement. The shock of it hit me right in the gut, like a cold blade between the ribs. But as I looked into Brad's greedy little eyes, the hurt started to harden into something sharper. I realized this wasn't just some difficult son-in-law. This was a downright parasite who'd mistaken my kindness for weakness. I didn't scream or cry, bless my heart. I just nodded, walked right out of that library, and got to work on the most meticulous plan of my life. But let me back up a bit here, because you need to understand how I got to that country club library in the first place. See, my name is Catherine Wells, though most folks just call me Kathy. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress. We didn't have much, but what we had was honest work and the kind of values that don't get taught in fancy schools. My mama used to say, "Kathy, you treat people right, and the world will treat you right back." I believed that for most of my life, until Brad came along and proved that sometimes the world sends you snakes in fancy suits. I became a nurse right out of high school. Worked the night shift at County General for 15 years. It was grueling work, I tell you. I'd see things that would break your heart. Sick children, dying elderly folks with no family to visit them, accidents that changed lives in an instant. But I loved it, because I was helping people, making a real difference. That's where I met my husband, Thomas. He was a paramedic, brought in a car accident victim one night, and we just clicked. He had this way of making me laugh, even on the hardest shifts. And within a year, we were married. Sarah came along 2 years later, and Lord, she was the light of our lives. Thomas and I, we worked opposite shifts, so one of us could always be home with her. We lived in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment above a bakery, and I swear, the smell of fresh bread every morning was the only luxury we needed. Sarah was a bright little thing, always reading, always asking questions. We knew she was special from the start. When Sarah was 7, Thomas died in a helicopter crash while transporting a patient. One moment I had a husband and a partner, and the next I was a widow with a child to raise and bills I could barely pay. The grief nearly destroyed me. I'd lie awake at night in that empty bed, wondering how I was going to make it through. But every morning, Sarah would climb into bed with me, wrap her little arms around my neck, and say, "It's okay, Mama. We're going to be okay." And somehow, we were. I took on extra shifts, worked holidays, picked up overtime whenever I could. I learned medical billing on the side because the pay was better. And eventually I started my own small company from our apartment. It wasn't glamorous. I'd be up until 2 a.m. processing claims, then up again at 6 to get Sarah ready for school. But we made it work. By the time Sarah was in high school, we'd moved into a real house, nothing fancy, but it had a yard and 3 bedrooms, and it was ours. I was so proud of that house. Sarah excelled in school, got herself a full scholarship to a good university. She studied business and marketing, wanted to work in the corporate world. I was so proud of her, watching her walk across that stage in her cap and gown, knowing all the sacrifices had been worth it. She was going to have opportunities I never had, was going to build a life I could only dream of. After graduation, Sarah got a job at a prestigious marketing firm in the city. She started climbing that corporate ladder fast, making connections, attending fancy events. That's where she met Brad Thornton. He came from old money, the kind of family that had their name on buildings and endowments. His father owned a law firm, his mother sat on charity boards, and Brad himself supposedly ran a tech startup that was going to revolutionize something or other. I never quite understood what it did, if I'm being honest. Sarah brought Brad home to meet me about 6 months into their relationship. I cooked my best pot roast, cleaned the house top to bottom, wanted to make a good impression. But from the moment Brad walked through my door, I could feel something was off. He looked around my modest home like he was touring a museum of poverty, with this thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. He barely touched the food, said he was on a special diet, made comments about how quaint everything was, how authentic. Sarah was different around him too. She laughed louder at his jokes, talked about things I didn't recognize, private clubs, vacation homes, people I'd never heard of. It was like watching my daughter put on a costume of someone else's life. I tried to talk to her about it once, asked her if she was happy, if Brad treated her right. She got defensive, said I wouldn't understand, that I'd spent so long being working class that I couldn't see the opportunities Brad was offering her. That hurt more than anything Brad could say to me. The engagement happened fast. Brad proposed at some charity gala with a ring that probably cost more than I made in a year. Sarah called me crying happy tears, and I tried to be excited for her, I really did. But something in my gut kept nagging at me. It was the same feeling I used to get in the ER right before a patient crashed. This sense that something was very wrong, even if I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. Brad started coming around more after the engagement, but never to visit me. He'd show up to help Sarah move into a bigger apartment he'd found for her, or to take her to meet wedding planners. Every time I saw him, he'd find a way to make little comments. Sarah's really moving up in the world now. She deserves to live somewhere nicer. We're planning a future that's very different from the past. I'm not stupid. I knew what he was saying without saying it, that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't fit into their perfect picture. About 3 months before the wedding, Brad started asking about my assets. Casual at first, just chatting about finances. How was my business doing? Did I have any investments? What about property? I mentioned that I'd bought a small lake house a few years back, a little 2-bedroom place up north that I'd saved for years to afford. It was my retirement dream, somewhere I could go and just breathe. Brad's eyes lit up when I mentioned it. Started asking all kinds of questions. How much land? What was the waterfront like? Was it developed? Said he and Sarah were thinking about investment properties. Then the loan requests started. Brad's startup needed capital, just $50,000 to close a deal that would triple the investment. I said no. He asked again a few weeks later. Different story this time. A business partner had fallen through, just needed $30,000 to bridge the gap. I said no again. I could see Sarah pulling away from me with each refusal. Brad was in her ear constantly, I'm sure, telling her I was being selfish, that I didn't support their future. She stopped calling as much, stopped coming by for our Sunday dinners. When I'd ask about the wedding planning, she'd give me vague answers, said Brad's mother was handling most of it. I wasn't even sure if I was invited to the planning meetings. That very night, while the rehearsal dinner was going on downstairs with all its clanking glasses and fake laughter, I sat in my car and called up David Chen, a private eye I'd kept on retainer for months, 'cause something in my gut just didn't sit right about Brad's fancy stories. I told David to stop looking for little red flags and start digging for bodies. See, I'd hired David about 2 months earlier, right after Brad had asked for that first loan. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just a worried mother who didn't trust anyone with her daughter. But David had found a few things already. Inconsistencies in Brad's story about his business, some debts that didn't match up with someone who supposedly came from money, a few complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau that had been quietly settled. Nothing concrete enough to take to Sarah, who would have just accused me of trying to sabotage her happiness. But that night, after Brad told me to disappear, I gave David the green light to dig deeper. Cost be damned. I needed to know who my daughter was really marrying. For the next 2 days, I tell you, I hardly slept a wink. I moved with surgical precision that would have terrified Brad if the fool had the sense to be afraid. I got my realtor to sell the lake house to a private group for cash, so that property Brad wanted so badly would be out of his reach before they even said I do. That hurt, selling that place. It was my dream, my escape. But I'd rather burn my own dreams to ash than hand them to a man who wanted to erase me. And I spent hours in my office, documenting every penny I'd ever given them, every loan Brad claimed he needed for that tech startup of his, and every lie he'd told about his background. I had receipts, emails, text messages. I built a case like I was preparing for trial because, in a way, I was. Sure enough, David Chen hit pay dirt faster than I could have dreamed. He called me at 2 a.m, voice tight with urgency. "Kathy," he said, "you need to sit down for this." Turns out Brad wasn't just some 2-bit gold digger. He was a bona fide professional con man. He'd been fired from his daddy's law firm for embezzling 6 figures, and his family had hushed it all up to avoid a scandal. Paid back the clients quietly, sent Brad away with a stern talking to, and probably a trust fund cushion. But Brad hadn't learned his lesson. For the last 3 years, the snake had been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, targeting the very social circle he was now trying to marry into. He'd convince wealthy people to invest in his tech startup, promising returns that seemed just believable enough. Early investors got paid with money from new investors, classic pyramid scheme stuff. But it was all falling apart. He needed a big score, needed it fast, and my daughter, my beautiful, ambitious daughter, was his ticket to credibility and cash. David had bank records showing Brad had already burned through most of what he'd scammed. The startup didn't exist. The office he claimed to work at? A virtual address. The business partner? Fictional. Brad was living entirely on credit and the money he could con out of people who trusted him. The wedding itself was another con. Brad had convinced Sarah to let him handle the finances, said his family would cover it. But David found that Brad had taken out credit cards in Sarah's name, maxed them out paying for the venue, the catering, the flowers. My daughter was going to wake up married and $50,000 in debt before she even knew what hit her. And the lake house? Brad had already been talking to developers about selling it the moment he got his hands on the deed. Had emails discussing the split of the profits. He'd planned to trick me into signing it over, probably with some sob story about Sarah's safety, or grandchildren, or whatever lie would work. Then he'd flip it, pocket the money, and I'd be left with nothing. As I looked at the bank records and spreadsheets, my heart broke for Sarah, dreaming of her fairy tale upstairs in her hotel room, probably trying on her dress one more time, imagining her perfect future. But I knew a temporary heartbreak was better than a lifetime of ruin. Brad would have destroyed her, financially, emotionally, maybe even physically, once she got in the way of his next score. The morning of the wedding, I skipped the hair salon appointment Sarah had made for me and went straight to the local print shop instead. I prepared 65 thick, cream-coloured envelopes that looked for all the world like wedding favours. But inside each one was a dossier on Brad's criminal history, his bank statements, and all the proof of his fraud. I included a 1-page summary at the front so people would understand immediately what they were looking at. Bank account numbers, names of victims, amounts stolen. David had even tracked down 3 other women Brad had gotten engaged to in the past 5 years, each one from a wealthy family, each one left in financial ruin after Brad disappeared with their money or their family's investments. I printed out their statements too, their warnings. One woman, Jennifer, had written, "I'm sharing this in the hopes that someone, somewhere, will stop this man before he destroys another life. He is not who he says he is. He is a predator, and he will take everything from you." Reading those words, I felt sick. My Sarah was just the latest in a long line of victims, but she was going to be the last. While the florist was fussing over the lilies, I was setting a trap. I'd tipped the waitstaff at the country club $200 each to distribute my envelopes at exactly the right moment. I coordinated with David, who'd already contacted the police and the FBI's fraud division. They were waiting outside, ready to move once the evidence was public. I'd thought about stopping the wedding before it happened, pulling Sarah aside and showing her everything. But I knew Brad. He'd have some explanation, some lie, and Sarah was so deep under his spell that she might not believe me. She might marry him anyway, and then I'd have lost my chance. No, the evidence had to be public, undeniable, and devastating. The ceremony was just a blur of lace and lies to me. I sat there in the front row, a ghost at my own daughter's feast, watching Brad smirk at me from the altar, like he'd already won. He thought I was a broken woman, ready to fade away. He'd actually winked at me when he walked down the aisle. The arrogance of it. During the vows, when the officiant asked if anyone had objections, I stayed silent. I wanted him to think he'd gotten away with it, wanted him to feel that moment of triumph before it all came crashing down. Sarah looked so beautiful in her dress, so happy and hopeful. It killed me to know what was coming, but I kept reminding myself, better this pain now than a lifetime of it later. At the reception, the whole room was buzzing with phony joy. Brad's family was there, his parents looking bored and superior, probably relieved their problem child was becoming someone else's responsibility. Sarah's friends from work, people I barely knew, all dressed in expensive clothes and talking about expensive things. I felt like an outsider at my own daughter's wedding, and that was exactly what Brad had wanted. When it came time for the toasts, I stood up. But I didn't reach for a microphone. Instead, I signaled the waitstaff, who I'd tipped handsomely to hand out those envelopes all at once, to every single table. I'd instructed them to do it smoothly, quickly, so Brad wouldn't have time to react before everyone had one. The place went dead silent as people opened those envelopes. I watched the smiles turn to horror on the faces of our friends and neighbours as they read the proof that Brad had stolen $50,000 right out of old Mr. Harrison's pension, that Brad had convinced Mrs. Chen to invest her late husband's life insurance payout and lost it all, that Brad had left 3 other women in financial ruin. The murmurs turned into a roar. People stood up, shouting questions. Brad's father went pale, probably realizing the scandal he'd tried to bury was now exploding in the most public way possible. Sarah's boss, a man named Richard, who'd known about Brad's startup, looked like he might be sick. Brad tried to grab the envelope from Sarah's hands, but she pulled away, eyes wide as she read the truth about the man she'd just married. I saw the exact moment her world shattered. She looked up at Brad, confusion and hurt written all over her face, and said, "What is this? What did you do?" Brad started stammering, trying to explain, but his father cut him off. "Shut up, Bradley, don't say another word." Even his own father knew he was guilty. I walked right up to the head table, calm and steady, looked Brad right in the eye and told him he might have wanted me to disappear, but the only thing vanishing today was his freedom. His face went from smug to terrified in about 2 seconds. He looked around the room, seeing all those faces staring at him with disgust and rage, and realized there was no talking his way out of this one. Sure enough, the cops showed up in minutes, David Chen having tipped them off with all the evidence. The FBI came too, agents in suits who moved through the crowd, like they owned the place. The sight of Brad being led out in handcuffs, his tuxedo jacket pulled over his head to hide from the cameras that someone had already called in, that was the only wedding gift I needed. The local news showed up too, got footage of the whole thing. By the next morning, Brad's arrest was all over the papers. Groom arrested at own wedding for multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. His father's law firm was in damage control mode, and Brad's mother wasn't returning anyone's calls. Sarah collapsed into my arms. The veil of manipulation finally lifted. She sobbed so hard I thought she might break. We left the reception, left all those people staring, and I drove her back to my house. She didn't want to go to the honeymoon suite Brad had booked, couldn't stand the thought of being anywhere he'd touched. We sat in my kitchen until 4 in the morning, Sarah still in her wedding dress, me still in my mother of the bride outfit, and she told me everything. She confessed that Brad had turned us against each other, convincing her it was me who wanted out, not him. He'd shown her fake text messages, supposedly from me, saying terrible things about her choices, about how she was throwing her life away on some rich boy. He'd intercept my calls, tell her I was busy when I'd actually called. He'd convinced her that I was jealous of her success, that I couldn't handle seeing her do better than I'd done. The snake had isolated her with his lies, just like the predator he was. He'd controlled her finances too, Sarah realized now, convinced her to give him access to her accounts for easier wedding planning. He'd been draining her savings slowly, moving money around so she wouldn't notice. She was essentially broke, had credit card debt she didn't even know about, and was facing the humiliation of having married a con artist in front of everyone she knew. But the story didn't end there. That evening, while Sarah slept fitfully in my guest room, David, Chen pulled me aside and told me Brad hadn't been working alone. He had a partner, a fella named Tyler Reynolds, who was pulling the exact same scam on a young woman named Emma over in the next town. Emma was set to marry Tyler in 2 weeks. Her mother, Victoria Ashworth, had apparently been asking questions too, getting the same bad feeling I'd had. Well, I couldn't just sit by and let another family get destroyed. So I reached out to Victoria Ashworth, a woman I barely knew, and we set a trap of our own. Victoria was sharp as a tack, a former prosecutor who'd retired to raise her kids. When I told her about Brad and Tyler's connection, she went into full legal mode. We gathered evidence, made a plan, and decided we needed to catch Tyler red-handed. Invited Tyler to a celebratory dinner at the Ashworth place. Told him we wanted to discuss investment opportunities. Tyler showed up in his best suit, charming smile in place, ready to run his game. He started his usual spiel about needing a loan to expand the business, how Brad had been his partner, and now he needed to restructure. He had spreadsheets, projections, the whole dog and pony show. Victoria and I, we sat in the shadows like a silent guardians, letting Emma ask the questions. Emma was smart, played along perfectly, asked about specifics, got Tyler talking. He hung himself with his own words, contradicting things he'd told Emma before, making promises that made no sense. When Tyler started his usual spiel about needing a loan, we didn't hand him a check. We handed him Detective Morrison and a set of matching handcuffs instead. The look on that snake's face when he realized his partner had flipped on him. Brad had given up Tyler's name in exchange for a slightly reduced sentence. Well, that was the final piece of justice I needed. Tyler tried to run, actually bolted for the back door, but Detective Morrison had backup waiting. They tackled him right there on Victoria's patio, and Emma just watched. With her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She'd loved Tyler, or thought she did, and now she was watching him get arrested for trying to con her family. But she was also relieved. I could see it. Relieved that she'd found out before the wedding, before the legal ties, before the financial devastation. Victoria and I hugged Emma while the police read Tyler his rights, and I felt like maybe, just maybe, some good had come from all this pain. The fallout was massive, I tell you. Brad and Tyler both got serious prison time for fraud and grand larceny. Brad got 12 years, Tyler got 10. The investigation uncovered even more victims, people who'd been too embarrassed to come forward. The total amount they'd stolen was over $3 million. $3 million taken from hard-working people who'd trusted them. The FBI set up a victims fund, and some of the money was recovered, though not nearly enough. Brad's family tried to distance themselves from the scandal, but their name was mud in the social circles they'd once dominated. His father's law firm lost several major clients. His mother resigned from every charity board she'd sat on. They'd protected Brad too many times, and now they were paying the price for their complicity. And the very social circle that used to look down on me, they started coming to me for guidance. Turns out, being working class, being someone who'd actually struggled, gave me a perspective they needed. They asked me how to spot con artists, how to protect their families, how to rebuild trust after betrayal. I helped where I could, though I'll admit there was a bitter satisfaction in having these wealthy folks ask for advice from the woman they'd once considered beneath them. Sarah and I spent months in therapy, rebuilding the bond that con artist had tried to burn. It wasn't easy. Sarah carried so much guilt about how she'd treated me, how she'd believed Brad's lies over her own mother. I carried guilt too, wondering if I'd pushed her too hard to succeed, if I'd made her feel like she needed to climb so high that she lost sight of what mattered. But we worked through it, slowly. We realized our connection was stronger than any lie he could tell. We started having Sunday dinners again, just the two of us. Started rebuilding all the little rituals Brad had stolen from us. Sarah moved back in with me for a while, needed time to heal and figure out who she was without Brad's influence. I didn't run off to some villa or hide away. No, I took the money from selling the lake house and the funds I'd saved for the wedding, and I founded a foundation called Second Chances. We provide legal aid, private investigation, and emotional support for families targeted by these romantic and financial predators. I hired David Chen full-time as our lead investigator, brought Victoria Ashworth on as our legal counsel. Even Emma joined us, wanting to help other women avoid what she'd almost gone through. We work with law enforcement, educate the public about romance scams, and provide resources for victims. I found my purpose not in the quiet life Brad wanted to force on me, but in the loud, righteous work of protecting others. I'm no longer just a mother or a nurse. I'm a shield. We've helped dozens of families so far, stopped at least 8 weddings that we know of, exposed 5 different con artists operating in our state alone. The foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined, with volunteers and donors and people who just want to help protect others from predators like Brad. Sarah's doing better now. She went back to work, though she left that marketing firm for a job at a non-profit, said she didn't want to be around those people anymore, the ones who valued money and status over substance. She's dating again, carefully, with eyes wide open. She brought her new boyfriend to meet me last month, a high school teacher named Marcus, who coaches soccer on weekends and drives a 10-year-old Honda. He's genuine, kind, and when I asked him about his intentions with my daughter, he looked me right in the eye and said, "Mrs. Wells, I just want to make her happy. That's it." I believe him. Emma's thriving too. She went back to school, got her degree in social work, and now she works with us at the foundation. She's become like a second daughter to me, and her and Sarah are close as sisters. Victoria jokes that we're an army of women who refused to be victims, and I suppose that's true. Last week, Sarah asked me if I regretted how I handled things, if I wished I'd stopped the wedding earlier, saved her the public humiliation. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. No, I told her, because it needed to be public. It needed to be undeniable. If I'd pulled you aside privately, Brad would have talked his way out of it, or you might have married him anyway and I'd have lost you forever. The truth needed to be so big, so obvious, that there was no room for his lies. And, yes, it was painful. But temporary pain is better than permanent destruction. She cried, but she nodded. She understood. Because justice isn't about the pain you inflict on those who hurt you. It's about the peace you restore to the world they tried to break. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you something. It's about protecting the next victim, and the one after that, and making sure that predators like Brad and Tyler face consequences for their actions. I still miss that lake house sometimes. I drive by it occasionally, see the new owners have fixed it up real nice, but I don't regret selling it. That property, my retirement dream, it became the seed money for something bigger than myself. It became second chances, and through that foundation, I've saved more than just myself and Sarah. I've saved families, futures, dreams. So if Brad wanted me to disappear, well, he got the opposite. I'm more visible than ever, more vocal, more determined. I've been interviewed by local news, written articles, spoken at community centres. I'm everything he tried to silence, amplified. And somewhere in a federal prison, Brad knows it. I hope he thinks about me every single day. I hope he regrets underestimating the working-class nurse he thought he could erase. Because I didn't just survive him. I used his attempt to destroy me as fuel to build something that will outlast both of us. That's what real strength looks like. Not disappearing when someone wants you gone, but standing taller and fighting harder until you've made sure they can never hurt anyone else again. And you know what? I sleep just fine at night. Better than I did when I was lying to myself about Brad. Better than I did when I was watching my daughter slip away. I sleep the sleep of someone who knows they did the right thing, even when it was the hard thing. So to anyone out there going through something similar, listening to this and thinking about their own Brad or Tyler, let me tell you something. You are stronger than you know. You are worth fighting for. And temporary heartbreak, public humiliation, short-term pain, all of it is worth it if it saves you from a lifetime of manipulation, abuse, and destruction. Don't let anyone convince you to disappear. Stand your ground, fight back, and turn your pain into purpose. That's how you win. Not by getting revenge, but by making sure the same thing doesn't happen to someone else. That's justice. That's healing. That's how you take back your power. Now, before we wrap this up, I want to remind you all, if you enjoyed this story, be sure to like the video and drop a comment letting me know what you thought. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, and it really does help us keep bringing you more stories like this one. Thank you all for listening, and I can't wait to see what you have to say. Until next time, y'all take care now. You hear?